Buried treasure is the stuff of childhood dreams, but if you find it, can you keep it? Is finders keepers the law? Ian Fletcher found a gold Tudor jewel worth tens of thousands of pounds, possibly belonging to Henry VIII. He handed it in, and following an inquest, it was returned to him by the coroner. He was then sued by the council and ultimately faced a legal bill of £35,000. So how did his lucky find end up costing him a fortune? I'm Daniel Barnett, a barrister based in London, and I'm also the presenter of the Legal Hour on LBC Radio. In this video, I'll explain how the Theft Act, the Treasure Act, and case law relating to land ownership governs what you can keep and what you can't. Please do subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so, to make sure you stay up to date with all things legal. Thank you. Before I reveal what happened to the not so lucky Ian Fletcher and the very lucky Edith Pretty, played by Kerry Mulligan in the recent Netflix film The Dig, we should get one thing straight. Just because you find something, it doesn't make it yours. It remains the property of whomever lost it. If you were to find a wallet in the park, you'd normally be obliged to return it to the owner, otherwise you might be committing theft. But the law does sometimes provide a defence. The Theft Act 1968 states that taking property will not be considered dishonest, and therefore not theft, if you believe that the person to whom it may belong cannot be discovered by taking reasonable steps. But things get more interesting if the owner can't be traced. This is usually the case when historic artefacts are unearthed. Thousands of historical treasures are dug up each year, often by people with metal detectors. I nearly said like you and me, but it's definitely not like me. I have not got a metal detector, and most of these are returned to the finders. Under the Treasure Act, the Treasure Act 1996, there's an obligation to report all finds of precious metal, that's gold or silver, all finds of precious metal over 300 years old, as well as coins found together in a hoard, because these can be classed as treasure. Since 2003, the obligation's been extended to include groups of prehistoric finds made from base metals. And in December 2020, it was announced by the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport that the scope of the Act would be widened further to include items which are historically or culturally significant. When a find is made, an inquest is held, and the coroner must rule on whether the items are in fact treasure. If it is, it technically belongs to the Crown and it's offered to a museum. If the treasure's wanted by a museum, the finder receives a reward equivalent to the market value. So in 2009, the largest ever hoard of Anglo-Saxon gold was found in a Staffordshire field. It was valued at £3.85 million, with the reward split between the finder and the landowner. When rewards are split in this way, it's normally because an agreement has been signed between the parties in advance of such a discovery. Now, if no museums want to acquire the treasure, the items are returned to the finder. When Ian Fletcher found his Tudor jewel in 1992, its fate was governed by treasure trove, the law predating the Treasure Act. Single stray finds, which were not deliberately buried, were not considered treasure under the old law, which was why the jewel was initially returned to Ian. But in these circumstances, as is still the case today, the landowner may have a claim. The recent Netflix film The Dig told the story of the discovery of the Sutton Hoo ship burial in Suffolk. Edith Pretty was entitled to keep the Anglo-Saxon gold, which is widely regarded as the nation's greatest ever hoard. It wasn't declared treasure because the original owner never intended to return to it. So the spectacular find belonged to the landowner, because there's an established legal principle that the lawful possessor of land owns all that is underneath it. Edith went on to donate the treasure, the Sutton Hoo treasure, to the British Museum. I've actually been there recently and I've seen the display. It is incredible. I would strongly encourage anybody who lives in the surrounds of London to go and look at it. It is mind-blowing. But back to the law. Things became less clear, or things become less clear, when an item is simply on the land rather than attached to it or buried under it. So in a case called Parker against British Airways Board, a gold bracelet was found in an airport lounge and the owner couldn't be traced. The finder of the bracelet was entitled to keep it over the airline, which owned the lounge, because it came down to a matter of control. The airline would need to demonstrate, said the court, a manifest intention to exercise control over the land and anything which might be on the land. But of course the airline didn't even know the bracelet was there. And as a result, the maxim of finders keepers applied. Ian Fletcher found his Tudor brooch with a metal detector on a public open space. But Waverley Borough Council was the trustee of the land on behalf of the public, and it argued that as landowner it owned the brooch. But the council weren't landowners in the traditional sense. Their control of the land was limited by the terms of a covenant, of a contractual promise, and as trustees they were obliged to allow recreational pursuits on the land, and Ian Fletcher argued that metal detecting fell into that category, and with the right to engage in metal detecting came a right to dig up objects and carry them away. Now, because of their obligations under the covenant, argued Ian Fletcher, the council didn't exercise sufficient control over the land to be able to lay claim to the brooch. The Court of Appeal disagreed, because metal detecting, they said, wasn't of a like nature to other pastimes mentioned in the covenant, such as golf, such as cricket. It was in fact inherently invasive, said the court, and so amounted to trespass, undermining Ian Fletcher's claim to the find. The council was therefore entitled to have the brooch returned. And although Ian won his case initially, after losing the appeal, things went from bad to worse when costs were ordered against him. The council took a charge out over his home, and instead of owning a jewel worth tens of thousands of pounds, he faced a bill for even more. Ian Fletcher may have struck gold, but he ended up losing a fortune. The council also lost out because the jewel was later stolen from the local museum in Farnham. Losers, weepers, all round, I'm afraid. Please do take a look at this video if you'd like to know more about theft, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on future pending updates relating to the Treasure Act. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Barrister Daniel Barnett. Bye bye.